First of all, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today. Today we have 1994 Switzer Fellow Beverly Craig with us. She's an energy efficiency specialist with Homeowners Rehab Incorporated, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She's been working with the nonprofit for 6 years to improve the water and energy performance of its multifamily affordable housing, which includes over 1,000 units of affordable housing in Cambridge. Owners Rehab greens their portfolio by installing energy-efficient devices in their properties, which helps them meet both financial and social goals. Prior to Homeowners Rehab, Bev was a brownfields redevelopment specialist in Dorchester and Milwaukee, as well as an environmental protection specialist with the U.S. EPA. Bev holds a Master of Public Policy degree from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and she did her bachelor's at the University of Southern California in International Relations and Environmental Studies. We're very lucky to have Bev with us today talking about a topic that's important not only for professionals to understand, but also individual homeowners, since homeowners are often making the decisions that govern the energy efficiency of their own homes. So thanks so much for being with us, Bev, and I will hand it off to you.
Thank you, Lauren. I want to start off by thanking the Switzer Foundation, not only for the scholarship many, many years ago, but for the network of people that I've been introduced to through the years, through the webinars that they put on and the retreats. It's really great and inspiring to meet such incredible people. So today I'm going to try and tease out for you some lessons for people who own homes or investment properties, things to try and make your property more sustainable. So I'm focusing on existing buildings, and I'm coming from the perspective of green affordable housing in multifamily buildings. So what I have for you on this first slide is a picture that I think is a great inspiration. This is a property that we purchased 3 years ago. It's a 12-unit apartment building, and we did everything that we could in a gut rehab to make the energy efficiency and water efficiency improve on this building. So we super insulated it. We added condensing boilers. We added solar PV and solar thermal, and the result was great. It was exceeded our expectations, actually. We were able to reduce the energy use overall in the building by 69%. So I just wanted to point out, even though most of us don't have the ability to do a gut rehab on our homes, if you are able to go as far as you can get really far in energy reduction. And Lauren, I'm having trouble advancing the slides. Here we go. I work for Homeowners Rehab. We are a small, nonprofit, affordable housing developer and owner. And like Lauren mentioned, we own quite a few apartments, and that's in 70 different buildings across Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we have a lot of variety in our portfolio, a lot of small 6-unit buildings to all the way to a 300-unit high-rise building. And I'm very fortunate that the organization I work for is really committed to green buildings. They had been building new construction projects that were green for quite some time. And then when I joined them, we've been very active in doing heating retrofits, lighting retrofits, and water retrofits on the 70 different buildings that we own. And part of the reason that my organization is interested in doing this is we spend quite a lot on utility costs, and that's an important part of our operating costs. We spend almost $1.65 million annually. And it's funny because in small batches, the little bills that come in every month, they do really add up. And I think that that's a lesson for homeowners to take into consideration too. We don't always notice what the total costs are until we actually add them up. And I want to step back for a minute and talk about why buildings are so important. I think when we think about climate change, a lot of us tend to think about the biggest contributors being cars and transportation, or maybe industry belching emissions. But actually, the largest contributing sector to CO2 emissions in the U.S. is the U.S. building sector, with 38% of carbon dioxide emissions. And that compares actually to transportation at 32% and industry at 28%. Another reason that buildings are super important is that the difference between A conventional building and a green building can be really quite large. The energy use of a green building can be 50% less than a conventional building. The carbon emissions 40% less, water usage 40% less, and the solid waste generated 70% less. So one of the lessons in dealing with R70 buildings that I think is maybe pretty obvious to people, but still something that people don't necessarily do, is how important it is to monitor the energy usage and water usage of your building. Kenneth Galbraith, the economist, once said that things that are measured tend to improve, and I definitely believe that. Somehow just focusing your attention on what your usage is going to influence your behavior because you're paying more attention to it. So if you don't right now keep a spreadsheet of what your energy usage is, I highly recommend just pulling together an Excel spreadsheet with one tab that has natural gas usage, one that has electricity usage, and one that has water usage, and to just pull your latest bill. Usually it has 12 months worth of your usage information, and start entering that information on an annual basis. You'll be able then to track whether you're making progress or you've had a strange year or if something's sort of out of whack. The other important thing to do is to benchmark your building. And by benchmarking, I mean to be able to compare your building to other buildings. And with cars, that's a real easy thing to do. I have pictures here because we have miles per gallon as a metric that we can compare car to car. So a Hummer is going to use something like 5 miles per gallon. A Prius can get about 50 miles per gallon. And so by using that metric, you're able to compare the cars. We want to be able to do that too for buildings, which is a little bit tougher because you have to figure out how many BTUs per square foot your building is using. Now, if you're lucky, like me, and you live in an area where your utility does do homeowner benchmarking, you may get a report that looks something like what's on the screen right now. So this is something that my natural gas provider sends to us on a monthly basis, and it compares what my usage is in the gray to what my efficient neighbors are doing in the green to all my neighbors around me. And so this is a nice thing because it gives you a sense of whether you're doing well, you're doing better than efficient people around you, or you're doing worse. And it's a really good thing for people who don't typically focus on how efficient their building is, because it sort of it gives you a sense of how you compare. Now, if you live in an area that does this already, I highly recommend giving your utility a call and telling them that you like this and that you think it's an effective tool. If you live in an area where the utility doesn't do this, I recommend calling your utility and saying that you want to see homeowner benchmarking done. It has been proven to be quite successful in raising awareness of people in their neighborhood. When they get little frowny faces that they're not doing as well as other neighbors, it makes them much more likely to invest in energy efficiency. Now, if you live in an area where they don't do benchmarking, there is a way for you to benchmark yourself. And the way you can do that is to Google Energy Star Home Energy Yardstick. It's a website that the U.S. EPA has. And you go to that website, and it prompts you with certain information about your home. So it asks you the age of the home, the square footage of the home, your zip code, and it asks you to enter 12 months of your utility data. So you need to have a utility bill that has your summary on it. And then it processes all that information and sort of spits out a number from 1 to 100 that gives you a sense of how well you compare to other people in your zip code. So I highly recommend doing that because that's going to tell you whether your building is an energy hog, whether it's sort of average, or whether it's doing really well compared to others. Now, what do you do once you've figured out that you are average or maybe your building is an energy hog? The first step that you want to take is to bring in an energy auditor. Now, a lot of utilities across the United States have an auditing program, And so your first call should be to your utility to see what kind of auditing programs they have or what kind of subsidy they have for energy audits. And when you bring, there are different levels of energy audits. A lot of utilities provide a walkthrough, but no diagnostic tests. And it's good to go ahead and get those and see how far they can get you on figuring out diagnostically what you need to do in your home. I do also recommend, especially if you live in a very cold climate or a very hot climate, the idea of hiring somebody to do diagnostic tests. There are two different diagnostic tests that we use a lot in multifamily buildings. And the first is the blower door test. And the picture on the left shows a blower door. It's put in your front door. They close off all the windows and doors in the rest of the house. And then they use the fan that's on the bottom to depressurize the home. And what that does is it helps them measure how much air leakage there is throughout the home. So if you are in a home that has a lot of cracks and gaps to the outside and it's allowing a lot of air infiltration, then it's going to have a high number for the blower door test. If it's a very tight home, it's going to have a low number. And it not only tells you sort of how many air exchanges, but you can also use it to understand where the gaps are that need to be sealed. The other test that is a good test to do is an infrared test. The picture on the right shows an infrared picture of a home. And what it does is the different color gradations show where the heat is escaping from the home. This picture was taken on a cold day, and you'll see that at the very top of the home there is a pipe penetration, and it's white around the pipe penetration. That's indicating that there's no insulation or air sealing around that pipe, and that's a big source of heat loss. You'll also notice in the walls that towards the top of the walls, there's a red to orange to yellow area. That's where the insulation has settled some in the walls. And so your energy auditor for a home like this might recommend topping off the insulation in the walls. There's also quite a lot of red at the very top of the roof, and that's an area that there might be air infiltration or a need for more insulation. Now, what is your energy auditor going to say? Usually your energy auditor is going to recommend the low-cost, quick payback items. And those are the things that you should start with in your home. And again, before you get started on doing any of the implementation work, you want to check with your utility, because utility programs often have subsidies for any of this work, the air sealing or insulation work that it might be recommended. Air sealing is basically caulking up any of the cracks and gaps that might be throughout the home. It's a very low-cost implementation step. It doesn't cost that much at all, and it's something that homeowners, if they're educated about what they're doing, can do it themselves. But it's also something that if you want to hire out, I recommend talking to an insulation company and asking them if they do air sealing. A good insulation company is also going to do air sealing. And so that helps you pick out what kind of insulation company you might want to hire. In terms of places that they might air seal, some places are like utility chases, kitchen soffits, fireplace surrounds, recessed can lights. All of those have cracks between the building wall and allow some air penetration. And so by sealing them off, you can make your house a lot tighter and a lot less drafty. Insulation is also another thing that can be added. Most older homes don't have nearly enough insulation. And there's different types of insulation that can be used: fiberglass, cellulose, isonine. Isonine, which is a foam product, is a very nice product because it also has air sealing properties. It stops the air from penetrating. One other thing to note, I think a lot of older homes have fiberglass insulation. One hint, when you go up to the attic and you take a look around, if you see areas that are discolored with a dark area, that probably means that there's an air penetration point near where that the discolored area is, because fiberglass acts as a filter, and it's filtering out the dirt from the air that's going through that area of the fiberglass. Another thing that your auditor is probably not going to recommend that you do, but I think is a nice low-cost and very effective thing to do, is to plant a tree in a strategic place that shades your home during the summer. And if you plant a deciduous tree, the nice thing about that is it loses its leaves, and then in the winter when you want the solar gain, it allows the sunlight to penetrate and to go through. There's a lot of tips and hints on a website called arborday.org in terms of where you should plant exactly and how far away from the home, what types of trees to plant. But it's a good website that I recommend going to if you're thinking of planting a tree. They do say that 25% of the energy in a typical household for cooling can be reduced by shading of trees. So trees can make a big, big difference in your cooling bill. Another thing that I think most people know about already but don't necessarily use to the fullest extent are setback thermostats. First thing, if you have one of the round ones that's an old style, you're definitely missing out on opportunities for savings. A setback thermostat that you set back 10 degrees while you're sleeping or while you're out of the house can save quite a lot of money, and it doesn't cost very much to implement. The other thing that you can do is to use different thermostats, setback thermostats in different zones of your home. So if there's a zone that you don't use that much, you can set the temperature lower in the winter and save quite a lot of money. Another thing that I think people already know about is buying Energy Star appliances. But one thing that sometimes people don't think about is the energy use of an older appliance. If you own a refrigerator or a freezer that's from the 1970s still, if you were to upgrade to an Energy Star appliance, you'd be saving $200 a year. Because a refrigerator or a freezer runs 24 hours a day, it's a surprisingly high part of your electric bill. Another thing that I think people are starting to learn more about is the idea of vampire electric loads. What that means is when you have an electronic and you turn it off, a lot of times it doesn't really turn the power totally off. It continues to draw power. And an increasing percent of homeowners' usage for electricity these days goes to this vampire load. Now, there are some ways that you can minimize the vampire electrical loads, and there are certain devices that you can buy that can actually cut off the power completely to the devices that you're trying to turn off. For example, the one on the top here is a power strip. It's a smart power strip. What you do is you take your TV and you plug it into the green spot, and then you plug in anything that is a peripheral that's associated with the TV into the outlets that are next to it. So your DVD player, your VCR, your sound system, a gaming system, any of those kinds of things that you would only use when the TV is on, you would plug in to the parts next to it. Then when you turn off the TV, what happens is it cuts off the power to all the other outlets, and it makes it so that there's no vampire electric load for those devices. The nice thing about that power strip is that it also has two outlets on the end that are continuously on. So if you have a DVR or a networking system, something that needs to be on all the time, you can use that. Another device that I like is the Belkin small device. If it bugs you that when you charge your phone overnight or your iPad or any small device that needs charging, right now when you leave it plugged in overnight in the wall, it just continues to charge even though it doesn't need to. And that's why the charger is warm when you unplug it. So this device, it has a half-hour, a 3-hour, and a 6-hour button on the left-hand side. And what you do is you plug in say the iPad, to the device. You set it for 3 hours, you plug it into the wall, and after the 3 hours it cuts off the power. So you can buy any of these devices at EFI.org. Some of them are available in some hardware stores, but not all of them. But EFI has a very nice selection of energy efficiency devices. Another thing that's a quick payback item is water. Now, water in the Boston metro area is particularly expensive. So paybacks for most of the water retrofits that we do on our multifamily housing usually only takes about 6 months for it to pay back. It's often a low investment and a big payback. The types of things in a single family home that use water, I think the number one user of water is landscaping. So you should think about xeriscaping or drip irrigation if you want to reduce your irrigation load. Another thing that you should think about doing is replacing older toilets. Older toilets often use 3 gallons per flush, and today's toilets use 1.1 to 1.6. Now, I know that a lot of people have a bad idea of how low-flow toilets perform, but actually I think they have a bad reputation because the first generation of them were not very good and did require double flushing. Today's toilets, there are a lot of models that are extremely good and extremely effective and can reduce your water usage by quite a lot if you install them. The way to check this is before you go out and buy a toilet, check the MAP site. If you just Google MAP, it's a performance testing site that actually tests the flushing ability of all the different brands and models of toilets that are out there. And you want to buy something that's over 750 grams per flush. The other thing you should be doing is installing shower heads that are 1.5 gallons per minute. That's low, but there are great shower heads that are extremely effective and that use just that amount. They're the ones that we put in our properties, and they pretty much stay installed because people are happy with them. Aerators on your sinks in your bathrooms, 0.5 gallons per minute. It's something that you just don't really need a lot of water when you're in your bathroom. A kitchen aerator should probably be 1.0 gallons per minute because there you're actually filling up pots sometimes, so you want it to go a little bit faster. There are 2 other items that I didn't put slides for, but are low-cost items that I think people should think about when they're thinking about sustainability and their homes, and that is lighting. I think most people who are on this call probably already are using compact fluorescent bulbs. It's important to use those throughout the house. They are 60% more efficient than conventional bulbs and make a big difference on your electric bill. You do need to dispose of them as hazardous waste because they do have a small amount of mercury in them. So returning them to a Home Depot or a home improvement store, you can do that with your older bulbs. The other thing is recycling. I think most of us recycle already. But with single-stream recycling, it's easy to get to 50% of what's going out into the recycling. So if you haven't been able to increase your rate to about 50%, you should aim for that high. There are a lot of small things that you can do. On the recycling end, I know when we started trying to increase our rate at home, one of the things that we found was difficult was certain containers, like a yogurt container, might be difficult to wash out, and so sometimes they just got thrown away instead of getting recycled. But one easy thing to do is to put it in a full dishwasher, things like a yogurt container, and then just after it's washed to put it in the recycling. So finally we get to the more expensive things. High efficiency equipment is very important to install when you're at the end of a lifetime of either your boiler, your furnace, or your air conditioning unit. And it makes a big difference. For example, when we installed a condensing boiler in our home, we went from, in the benchmarking, we used to be use more energy than our efficient neighbors. But when we installed the condensing boiler, we switched to getting 2 happy faces, which was doing much better than our efficient neighbors. And so the condensing boilers can make a big difference, I think 20% often compared to a conventional boiler. These cost more, but they do make a big difference in the energy performance of your building. The other thing that a lot of people tend to think about replacing in our home is windows. I think maybe because there's a lot of advertising for windows and efficient windows. Actually, windows should be one of the last things that you do on your home. It has one of the longest paybacks and the lowest energy savings that you'll get out of all the different things that I've mentioned so far. Finally, renewables should be a final touch. They are very sexy, and it's great to have renewables, but it's the last thing that you should do. After you've replaced mechanical systems, after you've insulated as much as you possibly can, after you've tried to reduce your electric load as much as you can, you want to spend your money first on other things, and then when you've gotten to this point, put renewables on as a final touch. Solar PV systems, there now are quite a few power purchaser agreement deals in many states where the tax laws are sort of giving an advantage to third-party providers who come in and they own the solar panels and put them on your roof, and then you buy the power directly from them. That's a great way to not have to worry about the upfront investment cost, and it's a good way to get your electricity. So solar comes in 2 types. There's the solar PV, which provides electricity. Those are the panels that are on the top picture. And then solar domestic hot water, which is on the bottom, which preheats the water that's coming into your home so that your boiler or furnace has less, or your hot water boiler has less energy that it has to use to preheat the water. So finally, buildings we find and how they're designed tend to account for about 80% of the energy use and water use. So the way that they're designed is important, but resident usage is also important, and resident education. So we spend a lot of time doing resident education in our work at Homeowners Rehab. There are particular things, especially with recycling, where education is critical to getting a good recycling rate. Just a couple examples of our programs on recycling. We grade the recycling programs at each of our developments, so they get an A, B, or a C. We post those grades in the entryway to try and inspire people to do better. And another program that we run is the Catch Green-Handed program. What we do is we try and catch people in the act of recycling. We take a picture of them and give them a gift card whenever we catch them, and then we use their photo in the monthly newsletter for the development to try and inspire more people to go ahead and recycle, since they know that they might be able to get a gift card if they're caught green-handed. So those are a couple examples of the resident education programs that we run. Educating the occupants in your home is important too. Just turning off lights can make a big difference in the electric use of a building. And so if you have kids that tend to forget to turn off the basement light when they come in, sometimes it's fun to run a contest where you pay them pennies every time they catch somebody not turning off the light. I highly recommend contests for education kind of work. So overall, we have gone ahead and measured the utility use of all of our 70 buildings. We've identified which ones are the energy hogs. We've had energy audits done of those. We've implemented the insulation and the air sealing on all those different buildings, and done a lot of work on water retrofits and lighting retrofits. And that's saved us quite a bit of money. We save about $230,000 a year on our utility bills, so it's about 15% savings that we've been able to find. And it's great for the environment, and it's great for our residents. So I'd be happy to take questions. I have a number of slides and I'm happy to talk about different suggestions on fixtures if people are interested in that too.
Super. Thank you, Bev. Excuse me, I haven't talked in a minute. So for the attendees, because this is a new system that we're using, I know there's a few different ways to ask questions. What we're going to do is actually, if you can use the feedback form, if you've got a question and you'd like to ask it via audio, please just go ahead and use the yes button, and that way I can call on you. I can unmute your microphone and call on you. Otherwise, if you don't have a microphone or you just want to type a quick question, you can feel free to use the chat window to send a text question. So either use the feedback button to say yes, and that way I can unmute you, or go ahead and ask a text question. While we're waiting for people's questions to come in, Bev, I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
So you've got some behavioral methods to help people recycle, the sort of feedback loop of the photos and the gift cards. But I'm wondering, once you do all of these retrofits on your buildings, do you do anything else then to help them be more efficient? Do you give out information, or sort of how do you help them change behaviors, not take longer showers, say, or not flush the toilet, constantly, or anything like that? Do you worry about that, or do you find that the improvements that you've made kind of override any less than ideal behaviors?
Well, I think we do education. We put together a living green guide every time we do a gut rehab or a major improvement on a building, and that does everything from talk about where the nearest zip car is to the residents, to sort of why they should keep their thermostat set at a low level, why they should turn off the water when they're brushing their teeth. Small steps that people can take within the framework of the building. But I do think that probably 80% of the energy and water performance has to do with the actual building itself and how it's designed. And it's more in the 20% range that the residents influence what the energy performance and water performance is. So an aerator on a bathroom sink is going to make a lot bigger difference than somebody deciding to turn off the water while they brush their teeth. Right.
That makes sense. So in the meantime, we have a question from Mark Switzer asking if you would mind making your presentation available with some additional web citations, and maybe even if it wouldn't violate your company's copyright, if you would make a copy of one of these Living Green guides available?
Sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Great. Then we'll make sure all of that, I'll get the materials from you, and we'll make sure everything is posted to our blog. And Mark will send out a link to that to attendees as well as folks who couldn't attend today. So we'll make sure all of that's available. In the meantime, I have one more question. I have another question. You mentioned utilities, and this always comes up when it comes to energy efficiency. People in the know say, your utility company is a great source of information about saving electricity. But then when you talk to homeowners, they often say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why does my utility company want me to use less electricity? Don't they get paid when I use more? So could you explain a little bit why it is that utility companies are so invested in the energy efficiency game, and why there's so many resources and things available for homeowners?
Well, it varies a lot from state to state, so it's hard to generalize. But a lot of it takes when a power company has to add a new plant to generate additional generation, it's a very expensive investment. And a lot of times they find it cheaper to invest in energy efficiency than to invest in a new plant. And so there's often monies available for energy efficiency to support it through either energy audits or like subsidies for insulation or subsidies for high-efficiency equipment. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason might be that there's a state law that sort of sets limits on and adds a fee for energy efficiency. Massachusetts, for example, has the Green Communities Act, which allows utilities only to produce a certain amount, and they have to have a fee for energy efficiency on the bills, and so that money goes back into energy efficiency. So again, it varies a lot from state to state. I know some states are very active in requiring the utilities to do things like that, and others are not at all.
Super, thank you. Raymond Costantino has a question. He says, it seems that education on behavior is a large part of energy consumption. And he's asking, have you compared buildings that have good behavior changes versus buildings that can improve behavior, or created contests between buildings or anything similar?
We have, it's pretty hard. In multifamily buildings, we tend to pay for the heat, the water, and the common area electric. So if there's a community room, we pay for the electric there or the hallways. And tenants tend to pay for their own electricity. So we have targeted energy efficiency workshops towards what tenants are most interested in, which is how to save energy on how to lower their electric bill. So we specifically, to get people out to these meetings, focus on that and things that they can do to lower their electric bill. And then we try and feed additional information in there about recycling and about keeping energy use, keeping their thermostats low, things that they can do to keep their system going efficiently. We have held contests with it when we've had some of those, where we call it the biggest loser. So who loses the most energy in a year period, who's able to reduce their energy load by the most. And it's been difficult to track that information, I've got to say. We've done it twice, and contests definitely are exciting for people, and it gets them motivated, but it's sometimes hard to maintain people's attention for a full year to measure their energy use. But we do get waivers, and we do track that. And I do think that contests are a good thing. For the recycling grades, when a building brings up their recycling grade to an A, we have a pizza party for them. So trying to build some kind of incentive into the system is an important part of the resident education.
Super, thank you. It also, for those of you who are asking questions, if you have a follow-up question, by all means, feel free to post that to the chat as well. And you can also still use the yes feedback to get called on and ask a question in person. I have a question to follow up. Do you use these improvements to market your buildings? Do you find that tenants will sort of come to your buildings more willingly, or is it more just this is part of your mission and you're going to do it regardless of sort of the impact it has on the consumer?
It definitely is part of our mission. Unfortunately, affordable housing, it's very hard to find affordable housing, and so we have long waiting lists for all of our buildings. So we don't have trouble marketing what we have at all. Now, some of our buildings are a combination of market rate and subsidized housing, and so in those cases, the market rate units may benefit some from the marketing that we do that they're green buildings. I think people in particular like the idea that we put all of the devices and all the lighting and all of the refrigerators and washers and dryers are high efficiency, because they know that translates into a lower electric bill for them. But I think that for market rate housing, there definitely is something to be said about being able to market yourself as green. I think that it does help in marketing market rate units, and we're just in a weird position because it's mostly subsidized housing, and there are long waiting lists for those units.
Mm-hmm. And does the need for retrofit, or does it how does that play into your decision as an organization before you purchase or take over a building? Do you look at where the building is now and where it could be and how much that might cost? In other words, do you tend to veer towards buildings that need more work in terms of energy retrofits because of your organization's mission, or how does that sort of work in your investment decisions?
I would say we are generally out there looking for anything that we can find, but we like to find buildings that are in need of improvements because we are very lucky in Massachusetts. There's a utility program called LEAN that helps subsidize retrofits for lighting retrofits and heating retrofits. And so we like to find buildings that are below that are energy hogs that are below 10 BTUs per square foot per heating degree day, because we know that there's a lot of possibility for improvement. As owners, the operating budget for utilities can go from a very large percentage to something that's pretty small when we do retrofits. And so by us intervening in places where there are energy hogs or water hogs, we feel like we make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Ray had a follow-up question. He says, you may have covered this, but can you mention what the Obama administration is currently doing on this front, since retrofitting buildings seems to be a focus of his green policy during his first administration? Is there anything new?
There's not anything new that we've seen. We are a nonprofit, so a lot of the renewable energy tax credits that were made available, we can't really take advantage of because we're a nonprofit. So that didn't help much. Things have gotten a lot better in the last several years under the Massachusetts LEAN program, which is the utility program, but that's mostly a state driven by the State Green Community Act that requires a certain amount of money to go towards energy efficiency. So I haven't seen, there was a lot of talk about green jobs creation and weatherization and the ERA money. There was a lot of money that did go towards weatherization. We didn't actually get any of it, but I know that there was a lot of money that went out the door and did help with some green job creation.
Mm-hmm. Now, you had mentioned at the beginning that you had a few extra slides if certain questions came up, and those questions may not have come up, but I would love to know what else you had thought about talking about today. I know you had a few additional slides.
Yeah, I think I have a slide up right now. If people are interested in toilets, which is not the most sexy idea to talk about, but it's something that's necessary. One of the things that's a challenge in multifamily housing is that because the tenants don't pay for the water, they often don't report leaks to us. And so a toilet can start running and can run for months at a time without us realizing, and that costs a lot of money. So we spend a lot of time monitoring the usage of all the different buildings and looking at the monthly bills that come in and seeing if it's changing at all. But one way to get around that is usually what makes a toilet start leaking and running is a flapper that goes. There's a device in the toilet that's called a flapper, and it's a rubber device, and over time it gets old and it starts leaking. And there's something new called a flapperless toilet, and the Niagra flapperless, which is a 1.28 gallon per flush toilet, is a tray toilet. So instead of having a flapper, it has a tray. And what happens is the tray turns over when you flush the toilet, and it dumps the water in. And the nice thing about that is that you never have a flapper that's going. So that's a kind of toilet that we really like in multifamily housing, and it's also very effective in single-family homes. If you don't, usually flappers only last about 5 years, and then you need to be changing it yourself or bringing in a plumber. But if you want to avoid that issue completely, you can just get a tray toilet instead. And I also recommend the shower heads. Niagra has great shower heads that are 1.5 gallons per minute. I think some people hesitate to use low-flow shower heads because they're worried they're not going to be able to wash shampoo out of their hair, but a lot of it has to do with how good the shower head is. And Niagra shower heads are very, very good. And let me see if I had other slides. The other thing that you might try, sometimes toilets when they're leaking are silent and you don't really realize that they're running. One thing to do is to get a dye test. So just any Home Depot or any home improvement store will have these little tablets that you can put in your toilet, and you put it in the tank, and if it goes through to the toilet, then you know that you have a leaking toilet and you need to replace your flapper. I also mentioned MAP, which is the website that does the performance testing on toilets. This is some information about that website and where you should aim for if you're buying a new toilet. And I think that's about all I have, Lauren.
It's super helpful. And one topic I wanted to ask you to go back to a little bit, because it was at the very beginning of the presentation, you talked about benchmarking. And you talked about doing an Excel spreadsheet, which most people can figure out how to do. But what are we looking for? So I'm lucky enough to live in a community that actually has the energy efficiency, the homeowner benchmarking, that feedback form. In fact, they use the exact same template. It must be the same company that we get that, exactly, the homeowner benchmarking. I get that same report.
Do you get it for electric or gas?
We get it for electric. I live in Florida, and so there is some gas usage, but since heating is not actually the biggest thing, it's air conditioning, it tends to be more electric homes than natural gas. But what's always a struggle for me to figure out when I get that is figuring out what changed from one month to the next, that suddenly I'm efficient or I'm not efficient anymore, or what I could do to overall improve my efficiency. And we are actually lucky enough here to have the energy audits where people come in, look around. They came in, they looked through my entire house, said I was doing everything great. They only had a few small things like insulating my standpipe outside. And then they left, and I was still left thinking, well, what do I do? It's a relatively new house. I know what I'm using and what I'm not using, but I can't always identify how to make changes. And that must be a fairly big issue for multifamily housing too, and you have a lot of different users using at different rates. So how do you go in and tweak that a little bit more and sort of figure out what would work best, or where you're really using the most electricity? Is there a way to do that?
That's why bringing an energy auditor is important. The Excel spreadsheet really is. It doesn't give you weather-adjusted data, and so you have to always think about, was the last winter really cold? Was the last summer really hot? When you look at your year-to-year usage. For water, I think it's more useful because you can see, especially if you don't have a lot of landscaping, you might be able to tell that you have a leaking toilet from a gradual increase over time, or that there might be something wrong. Your shower heads might not be effective anymore at being low flow, for example. But that is a challenge. I still think it's important to track in an Excel spreadsheet, even though it's not weather-adjusted data. The nice thing about the Energy Star Home Energy Yardstick is that it does adjust for weather data, and it compares you to other people. So that's the nice thing about being able to compare to other people. They're going to be experiencing the same weather as you, and so you can sort of tell how you're doing against them. They're going to be experiencing the same weather, so you sort of know how you stack up with that.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful because obviously our weather patterns have changed pretty dramatically here in Florida. We've had extremely hot summers and much warmer winters than we've been used to. The last couple of years it's been dramatically different, so that's super helpful. I would just open it up. We only have a couple more minutes left, and just to ask if there are any other questions or any other things that you would like to mention before we finish up, Bev.
I would just say that your home is something that you can really affect a lot, and it's talking to other friends about what they do and what you do and sharing information is really important because you can make a bigger impact than just what you do in your own home by sharing information with other people.
That makes a lot of sense. I also wanted to mention, actually, that related to this topic, this webinar is part of a larger sort of thematic topic that we had here in the spring at the Switzer Foundation about energy efficiency. And we put out a newsletter at the beginning of this month, both about Bev's work with Homeowners Rehab, but also about a whole slew of other things that other Switzer Fellows are working on in energy efficiency, both on the residential level, on the commercial level, things like talking about solar panels and their impacts and how to choose them. We even have a few profiles of fellows who live in extremely energy efficient communities or homes, and a little bit about their process and what they have discovered in living in either rehabbed buildings or homes that were built from scratch to be more energy efficient. So if you're interested in that newsletter and all of the content in it, it is free. It's available on our website at switzernetwork.org/press-room. Or if it's easier, you can just go to switzernetwork.org and then type in energy efficiency into our search box, and it will come up then as well. So, Bev, thank you so much for participating in this and for helping us to understand all the different ways and to see a little bit about how you deal with this in a multifamily housing situation, because I think that's really helpful to understand when you deal with energy efficiency on a large scale and you've got the data and input to understand how it then translates to an individual home scale. So thank you so much for doing that for us.
You're welcome.
Have a great day, and same to everyone else. If you'd like to forward a link to this webinar and all of the resources that we'll post to it, if you'd like to forward that along to a colleague or friend, it will all be available in the next few days on our blog at switzernetwork.org/blog. And if you've got questions or comments about the webinar, you can always post them there as well. We have a section for feedback about the webinar. As you leave the webinar today, you'll also be presented with a very quick 4 or 5 question survey about the webinar, and we would love it if you would fill that out. It helps us to plan for future offerings in our series. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.